For more than 4 years, the war in Ukraine has transformed what many expected to be a short regional conflict into a defining geopolitical struggle of the 21st century. What began with Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022 has evolved into something far larger. A test of military endurance, industrial capacity, alliance cohesion, nuclear deterrence, and ultimately the future security and architecture of Europe itself. And as we move through the summer of 2026, one question increasingly dominates the strategic discussions in Washington, Moscow, Brussels, Berlin, Warsaw, and Beijing, which are witnessing the stabilization of a new Cold War, or are we drifting towards something far more dangerous? To understand where this conflict stands today, we first have to understand how dramatic the battlefield itself has changed. This is no longer a war defined primarily by tanks or crossing open fields or infantry assaults in the traditional sense. Instead, Ukraine and Russia have entered an era of industrialized drone warfare, precision strikes, cyber operations, economic warfare, and strategic attrition. Russian forces also continue to launch thousands of missiles and drone strikes each month against the Ukrainian infrastructure and urban centers. While Ukraine has dramatically expanded its long-range strike capability, targeting the Russians' oil refineries and logistics hubs, military installations, and energy infrastructure deep inside of Russian territory. The battlefield has effectively expanded hundreds of miles beyond the front lines, transforming the war into a contest of national endurance and industrial production as much as military maneuver. At the same time, the front lines themselves remain extraordinarily costly, and Russia continues to pursue a strategic and incremental territorial gains through the overwhelming firepower and manpower. While Ukraine seeks to impose unsustainable costs on the Russian military and economic infrastructure, every village captured and every drone intercepted and every missile launched now carries implications not only for the battlefield, but for the global balance of power. The war has become a test of which society can absorb greater losses, mobilize more resources, and sustain political will longer than its adversaries. Yet perhaps the most significant development is not occurring on the battlefield at all. It is occurring within NATO itself. Since Russia's invasion, the alliance has undergone one of the largest transformations in its history. Countries that once viewed defense spending as politically unpopular are now committing the unprecedented resource to military modernization. At the 2025 NATO summit in The Hague, member states agreed to pursue defense spending targets equal to 5% of gross domestic product by 2035, a dramatic increase from the previous 2% benchmark and a recognition that European security assumptions established after the Civil War have fundamentally collapsed. This transformation extends beyond budgets. NATO planners are restricting military doctrine around this assumption that a large-scale conventional war in Europe is no longer unthinkable. The new capability targets emphasis air defense systems, long-range precision weapons, missile defense networks, and logistics infrastructure, cyber capabilities, drone warfare, and rapid mobilization forces as well. The alliance's eastern flank, including Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, is rapidly fortifying itself against the possibility of future Russian aggression. These countries increasingly view the deterrence not as a theoretical exercise, but as an immediate necessity. The expansion of NATO itself also represents another profound geopolitical shift, like Finland's accession dramatically has extended NATO's direct border and with Russia by more than 1,300 kilometers, while Sweden's membership completed the military integration of the Nordic region. From Moscow's perspective, these developments represent a strategic setback of historic proportions. From NATO's perspective, however, they are viewed as necessary responses to the Russians' actions in Ukraine. The result is a security dilemma in which the defensive actions by one side are interpreted as offensive preparations by the other, creating a cycle of escalating military preparations and strategic mistrust. However, meanwhile, Ukraine itself has become deeply integrated into the Western defense planning despite not being a formal NATO member. NATO continues to provide the military equipment, intelligence support and training, financial assistance, and industrial cooperation on a scale unprecedented in modern European history. The discussions surrounding the additional long-term commitments, expanded missile defense cooperation, and its sustained defense industrial support demonstrate that Western leaders are increasingly view Ukraine's security as directly connected to the European security itself. But beneath the display of unity, tensions remain. Questions persist regarding the long-term sustainability of military aid and distribution of defense spending, and the burdens and the future role of the United States within the alliance. The European governments increasingly discuss the strategic autonomy and possibility that Europe may eventually need to assume greater responsibility for its own defense. Simultaneously, policymakers in Washington continue debating the costs, risks, and strategic priorities associated with maintaining America's post-Cold War security commitments. These debates do not necessarily indicate an alliance weakness. Rather, they reflect the reality that NATO is adapting to a strategic environment unlike anything it has faced since the Cold War. Perhaps the most alarming question, however, concerns the possibility of the escalation. Throughout the conflict, policymakers have sought to avoid direct military confrontation between Russia and NATO itself. Yet every expansion of military assistance, every cross-border strike, and every cyber operation, and every escalation in rhetoric raises concerns about miscalculation. Military planners across Europe openly discuss scenarios that once would have been considered implausible, including attacks on critical infrastructure, hybrid warfare campaigns, cyber disruptions, maritime confrontations, and even limited conventional conflict involving NATO territory itself. The purpose of these discussions is deterrence, but their existence reveals how dramatically strategic thinking has changed since 2022. The nuclear dimension of this conflict cannot be ignored either. Russia continues to emphasize its nuclear deterrent as cornerstone of a national security policy, while NATO reaffirms that nuclear deterrence remains central to alliance strategy. Both sides understand that the direct conflicts between nuclear powers carries unimaginable risks. Yet history demonstrates that the deterrent systems are not immune to miscalculation, misunderstanding, or political error. The fact that nuclear weapons remain in the background of virtually every major strategic discussion concerning Ukraine illustrates just how high the stakes have become. And beyond Europe, the consequences of this war continue reshaping global geopolitics, and China closely studies Western sanctions and alliances behavior. Iran and North Korea deepen their cooperations, with Russia, and defense industries across the world are expanding their production. Governments increasingly prioritize their resilience, strategic autonomy, supply chains, critical infrastructure protection, and military readiness as well. And in many respects, the international order that emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union has already ended. replaced by a world characterized by strategic competition, the regional blocs, and renewed great power rivalry. And perhaps that is the central question confronting the world today. Is the war in Ukraine an isolated regional conflict, or is it merely the first major chapter in a broader transformation of global politics, one that future historians may ultimately describe not as the end of one war, but as the beginning of an entirely new geopolitical era? I want to thank you for tuning in to the Unfiltered Political Lens. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And as the story continues to evolve, we'll continue bringing you the latest developments in deeper context and the difficult questions shaping our world. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace.